Good afternoon and welcome back to the Budget Committee meeting where we are talking about business units. We have gotten through one of the four business units that we were talking about that are on the schedule for today. So we now have the Human Resources Department. Can I have someone make a motion, please? Everybody is on mute, with the exception of me.
I'll take them. Mr. Chair, if you'd like.
I'll second that.
Okay, would you mind reading the motion, please?
Sure. Motion that the Budget Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to incorporate the Human Resources proposed 2021-22 budget and business plan as set out and discussed in the December 29th, 2020 staff report and supporting presentation by staff into the draft 2021-22 operating budget.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Daigle-Gammon, and I believe it was Councillor Stoddard who seconded that. So we should now have a presentation from the Human Resources Department.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Caroline Blair-Smith, Executive Director of Human Resources for HRM. And I'm very pleased to be here this afternoon to present the 2021-22 budget for HR. I do have my entire HR management team here with me this afternoon, and I will introduce them as we go through the different service areas. But if I could have the next slide, we'll start with our HR mission. Human Resources is committed to providing innovative and practical human resource strategies and solutions that address business needs and promote service excellence. And we are always trying to balance that need of practical against strategic. And I think we've come a long way in the last 12 months on this. Next slide, please. We have a look at the service areas in Human Resources. We have the Executive Director's Office. This is really just three people, myself, my AA Kasha, and my coordinator Joy. The Director's Office is very much focused on providing leadership and developing the HR strategic direction for human resources. The next service area we'll look at is employee relations. Employee relations incorporates three very large functions: our client services department, our labor relations department, and our conflict resolution department. It is managed by Laura Nolan. Many of you will be familiar with Laura for collective bargaining. And Laura has an M3 manager reporting into her, Grace Aldridge. So again, the focus with employee relations is on alignment of services to client needs. And just to give you a sense of the kind of things that they're working on, we are going to look at objectives later in the presentation organized through administrative priorities. But just to give you a sense of some of their large projects, they have the Hiring and Community Engagement Project, the Employment Equity Program. They will have 5 open negotiations going on this year. It is a big bargaining year for us. They are working on the Culture Change Project of ESR, KPMG, and now Anti-Black Racism Recommendations. And they are also working on an Accommodations Policy. This is another one of those projects where we're partnering with our friends in D&I. Another big piece of their work is the SAP Business Transformation Project. And I just wanted to touch a little bit on that project. That project touches all of the divisions in HR. It is underway and it will result in new recruitment and onboarding systems, an employee central system, as well as a fulsome LMS system, which we've been waiting for such a long time. We're so excited about. So that's employee relations. If I could have the next slide, please. Our next service area is total rewards. Total rewards is the combination of compensation and employee services. Britt Wilson is the M4 manager, and reporting to Britt is Kelly Hunt. A couple of their key objectives, again, that SAP business transformation we mentioned, some non-union job description evaluation enhancement tools, a DTA process review we're quite excited about, and a benefit plan review that will align with our health and wellness strategy. The next service area is organizational development, health and wellness. So we have combined organizational development and health and wellness under Tatiana Zazello. And Tatiana, reporting into her, has a new M3 manager, Eric Newbold. Eric is the newest member of our management team. We're very excited to have him. He has a very unique background of disability case management and organizational development. So welcome aboard, Eric. A couple of the big projects that are going on in OD Health and Wellness, the Halifax Flexible Work Environment, a new succession planning program, employee engagement surveys, a 3-year health and wellness strategy, and the LMS project we've already mentioned. So that just gives you a little glimpse into the service areas. If I can have the next slide, please. A couple of the successes that we wanted to note. The first one is that we have 3,999 training program participants this year. This is down very slightly from the year before. So I call attention to this because despite the pandemic, the OD team managed to flip on a dime and start creating virtual instructor-led training as well as online training and continue moving people through training programs. So we're very, very proud of those efforts. We did reopen the in-person training program for a few months while it was safe, but we've had to close down again and are very focused on the virtual training. We managed 600 new health files. That is down a little bit from the year before, and further on in the presentation, we'll talk about the reasons for that. Our voluntary employee turnover is at 1.25%. That is very low. It does not include retirements, but I will point out that, of course, the pandemic affects a lot of our stats in HR, and that would certainly be one of them. There's not a lot of people running out to new jobs in the middle of a pandemic. Internal promotion rate, 54%. Again, that one is most likely affected by the hiring freeze and the pandemic. So it's up slightly. 5 days are pre-retirement leave processing time. So that is down from a 2-week processing time and follows a Greenbelt process improvement project. So we're very proud of that one. And our service requests in our central service department, which we refer to as MyHR, are up to 7,000 service requests. That's an increase of 9.8% from the year before. Next slide, please. Okay, so if we look at the administrative priorities, and I'll run through some of the objectives and projects that we're working on to fulfill these priorities. The first is our people, engaged and skilled people. And this involves our strategic human resource planning. Many objectives under this one. First one would be the SAP Business Transformation Project we've talked about. The next one is the non-union job description and evaluation enhancement. And this is a simplification of process and tools. It will reduce the time for evaluation and new and amended job descriptions, and it will align our job descriptions with qualifications to attract and retain the right talent, as well as create clear career paths for workforce and succession planning. The next objective would be the Halifax Flex Work Environment, and you're probably all familiar with this project. We get so many questions and so many queries about when this is starting. This obviously is responding to demographic, economic, and technological changes in the workplace, and it gives the employees the ability to apply for flexible work arrangements and locations. It supports our integrated mobility plan and our regional municipal planning strategy. And I'm happy to say we are piloting it right now in HR, having great success with it, and looking forward to rolling it out to the organization on April 1st. Succession planning would be our next objective here. This is a modernization and simplification of the succession planning at HRM. We're hoping to make it a bit more user-friendly and assist the organization to identify internal and external talent specifically for future leadership opportunities. Finally, we have the employee engagement survey. And you'll see this one show up when we get to our budget numbers. A couple of years ago, we ran our first employee engagement survey in, I think it was 9 years. So we had years and years and years with no feedback and no real data to try to measure what our engagement was like at HRM. Once we ran that employee engagement survey, each business unit created action plans, and we are very much looking forward to having our next survey to be able to see what kind of successes we've had. Now, obviously, we are looking at how the pandemic will affect those results, but it remains a great tool for feedback in terms of how engaged your workforce is. If I could have the next slide, please. The next administrative priority is our people, diverse, inclusive, and equitable. So we continue to work on our diversity and inclusion recruitment strategy, HRM-wide. Our first objective under this is the hiring and community engagement strategy. We're going into year 2. We're very proud of the work that we've done so far on this, and I just wanted to highlight that during the pandemic, this work continued virtually quite quickly. So our HRBP for recruitment attended 55 virtual community outreach events, 90% of which were very focused on community partnership and diversity. And we have, for example, 9 planned for February, 2 of which are specific to diversity. So this project is to enhance HRM's ability to secure talent and increase diversity to meet current and future operational needs. It's continued engagement with local communities and partner organizations. I have to say we're very lucky in Halifax with the partner organizations we have available to us. We work very closely with organizations like ISANS, the Halifax Partnership, Ready, Willing, and Able, often hiring with the help of these partnerships. The project will foster and encourage inclusivity, accessibility, and transparency around employment, establish talent pools, promote job opportunities, and influence recruitment processes, support HRM's diversity, inclusion, and equity goals, as well as gender parity, and we hope position us as an employer of choice. The next objective is the Employment Equity Program. This one is in partnership with our friends in Diversity and Inclusion, and we are developing an employment equity program to be implemented over the next 3 to 5 years. Our goals for year 1 are to develop and implement an awareness campaign, focus on communicating the foundational concepts of employment equity, to finalize the details of our position around designating and preferred positions. I can't tell you how complicated an issue this is, so we are looking forward to getting this hammered out this year. And our third goal for this year would be to create a fulsome plan focusing on increasing diverse representation with a focus on our 5 equity groups in leadership positions within HR. The next objective would be the Accommodations Policy. Again, a partnership with our friends in D&I. It's in alignment with the accessibility strategy. And this will ensure job applicants and employees are provided accommodations to support a diverse, inclusive, and equitable work environment. So this is about removing barriers that may exist. And finally, our support for the initiative to fight anti-Black racism. So the goal is to implement and support all applicable recommendations in the CAO's response to the Anti-Black Racism Committee, ensuring alignment with our other programs and services. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, the next administrative priority is our people, healthy workplace. Under enhanced workplace culture, we are working on our conflict resolution process. Some of you will recall from the last time I was here, we talked about really making process improvements for intake. So to put it not so eloquently, we're trying to speed things up. So we reach resolution much faster in a much more direct way. So we're having great success with that, but we are still needing to review and refine the policy and the other supporting business processes involved with that. We are also working hard on an enhanced workplace culture. And I know we've talked about workplace culture in the past, and it was sort of this nebulous, we're going to train, we're going to talk about better behaviors. You know, it was a very large box, and we could never seem to wrap our arms around it. When we talk about enhanced workplace culture now, what we're saying is, we're going to do specific actions that we believe will impact the environment at HRM. And we're basing those actions on external reviews that were done that provided us with concrete recommendations. So largely this is about ESR, KPMG, but it will also be about the anti-Black racism recommendations as well. So we're working on addressing harassment and discrimination complaints involving workplace bullying, sexual harassment, and race. Employee Relations is implementing the recommendations to support a safe, healthy, diverse, inclusive, and harassment-free environment. So we are now making progress on ESR recommendations, and we are now at 32% completion for the KPMG recommendation. So we sort of have those 2 review recommendations going on at the same time, but they do work together very well. Under Healthy and Safe Workplace, we have our Corporate Health and Wellness Workplace Strategy. We're so excited about this strategy. We have just completed the document itself, and we were looking forward to moving to implementation. So this will be the implementation of the 3-year strategy to improve the workplace and employee health, safety, and well-being. The strategy focuses on areas of high importance for the prevention of the municipality's leading health indicators, mental health awareness, occupational injuries, and absenteeism indicators. Part and parcel with that is our benefit plan review. So this is a fulsome audit of our paramedical and drug claims in order to determine desired benefit plan changes, and the audit will guide the implementation of plan amendments. The benefits plan review will ensure alignment and integration with the corporate health and wellness workplace strategy to support prevention initiatives. If I could have the next slide, please. I feel like every time I present my budget, I'm saying we don't have very many concrete KPIs in HR, and that remains true today. Once the business transformation project is implemented, I will be very excited to come back to council with many, many KPIs. But today we really only have two that I can say with real confidence are accurate. The first we've talked about is the training attendees number. And again, we are only down 8.3% all through those pandemic months. So I'm just so proud of that team for the work that they did. And the health file referral, you can see we're down from 629 to 600 this year. And I think a lot of people are surprised at that because there were a lot of health files and concerns during the pandemic. But the numbers used to report on any file that was transferred to the health team. So whether or not it needed action, it would be counted in there. And so we've changed that to only count files that need action from the health team. So we'll see what that number looks like next year. It will be a better indicator for us. If I could have the next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to move into numbers, and usually the HR budget takes me about 10 seconds to run through. It is a very simple and a very small budget, but I am a bit of a change agent, and in all of the moving around and changes that I have driven over the year, I have made things far more confusing than they would normally be. So one of the things I want to draw your attention to right at the start is the comp and benefits, which you will see for us has a very significant increase. You'll see the $400,000 there and an 8.1% increase for March. That's a really significant number for us. And I think if I can just go to the next slide, I just want to address this on the next one as well. There we go. Now I want to address this here so you can see what I'm talking about, and then we can look at other pieces of the budget as well. So one of the things that I looked at when I came into this role was that outside of the centralized HR department, there were HR positions elsewhere in the organization. So they didn't report into HR, they reported into operations. And from what I could see, many of them were doing fantastic work. But there's of course always a risk in that. If you're not reporting into that central HR department, you're not getting the same kind of training, you're not getting the same professional development, you may be getting different messages, not having the same exposure to new policies and programs that are coming out of HR. So I worked with my operational partners to start to bring those positions in. And I just shout out to some of my partners who worked with me this year, Chief Kinsella, Dave Riggy, and Jane Fraser, our CFO. All worked with me to transfer HR positions into the budget. So $302,000 of that comp line is positions coming in from outside of HR. So we brought two positions in from finance. Those are the position management coordinators. We brought an HR generalist in from police, and we brought two HR generalists in from Halifax Transit. Now I want to stress this doesn't change the work those employees are doing. They are still assigned to those business units. They are still doing that work. They are simply reporting to the HR business unit and just creating that sense of consistency. We do still have a few positions out in the organization that we will be working on bringing in over the next year. We also transferred some positions out. So our three positions in safety, Jerry Blackwood and I sat down and saw a real synergy with facility and fleet and the safety positions and the work they were doing. So three safety positions went out to CCS. And I will mention, because Jacques has already presented, 7.6 positions went to the CIO's office from D&I. You won't see that reduction in our budget because when D&I came back to our budget last year, we kept them separate. We knew they were headed for bigger and better things. We knew they weren't going to stay with us long, so we presented on the HR and the D&I budget separately. So I can't point to that and say, hey, look at that big reduction, because it's not there. We eliminated one term health generalist we were able to do without. And then we added 3 new positions that are within our envelope this year, but are new for us. Two of them are employee data controller positions, and those are related to our business transformation project, in that the funding for them is coming from that project for almost the first year. Those positions are related to data integrity in the organization. We have, for as long as I've worked here, been struggling with data integrity, been struggling with the reporting, trying to make decisions based on a very not dependable reporting structure. And these positions are going to lay the foundation for accurate data that decisions can be based on. So those are the two employee data controller positions. And the third position is a new LR specialist. We are, well, I've talked about 5 open negotiations going on this year. We have a team of 5 LR specialists. We have over 80% of our workforce unionized, and the needs of that LR department just continue to grow. We're very proud of the relationship we have with our unions. We're very proud of the efforts that the LR specialists are putting into diversity and inclusion, putting very modern language into these collective agreements, really trying to turn the ship in labor relations. But they are over capacity, and we do need to address that in that department this year. So that is a very lengthy explanation for a slide that says we're going from 64 to 65. So I wanted to be as transparent as possible and give you a picture into all of the crazy things I've really done behind those 2 numbers. If we just touch briefly on the rest of the budget, which I have not messed with to the same extent, and I think if we go to the next slide, it will be helpful. There we go. So when we met with finance to talk about the envelope for HR, there were a number of different lines that we had realized over the pandemic we did not need all the money back. So, you know, there are lots of areas in the budget that we said, it's okay. We now know we can do with half, or, you know, we're talking about office furnitures and printing and, you know, out of town travel and all of those things that we just didn't need this year. But there were some things that we realized we desperately did need. And I think this is a great slide for showing that, because it shows the changes. And some of these numbers I know seem very small, but they all add up. So I just wanted to point out a few things. So the comp is on there that we've talked about already. A small increase in cleaning. Just when we looked at the different standards from public health and we looked at our training department, we felt we needed to adjust slightly for the cleaning contract that we had. The $75K in contract services, that is for the employee engagement survey. So that's a huge amount of money for us. So we're thrilled to see that, and we're looking forward to getting that survey done. But I just wanted to point out $75K is new money going in there for the employee engagement survey this year. A couple of other areas, $50K needed to go back in for our comp survey. So we're a large, complex organization. And it costs us money to get the market data that we need on compensation, to run our job evaluation programs, to make sure that we're at the right comp ratio, all of those pieces. $60K went back in for corporate training. We're not bringing that back up to pre-COVID levels. We think we've achieved some pieces with you know, virtual instructor-led training and online training. But the $60K will allow us to open that training department back up and create that balance. There's $66.8K in for special projects, which is our mental health week. We're very excited about promoting that this year. It's obviously very important right now. Significant money for our long service awards. At one point we talked about removing the long service awards project, and oh my gosh, the world fell apart. It is a very, very heartfelt program here in HRM. So similarly underneath the $15.1K for rewarding excellence, we created an employee recognition program at HRM, and it has been a smashing success. And we have seen so much uptake, managers, supervisors, colleagues recognizing each other, particularly as we've worked through the difficult times in the pandemic. And you'll also see some money added under miscellaneous expenses, and that is things like the marketing for our outreach campaigns and pieces like that. So I think I've hit on all the big pieces there, and that is our budget in HR this year, and I'm more than happy to take questions.
Super. Okay, thank you very much. I would just ask any members of council to, if you have a question, please indicate that in the chat. And we're starting off with the mayor. Go ahead. Mr. Mayor, are you there?
Sorry, Paul. Sorry, Chair. Thank you. Trouble getting on. Thank you, Caroline. And thank you to your team. Just in terms of clarification on the presentation, if I could, on page 11, the big one, 2021 approved 64, 21-22 planned 65, and then it talks about the full-time change includes 7 positions transferred. So the 64 would have been 57 before, like that's not 64 minus 7, right? Let's explain that.
So thanks for the question, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Chair, through you to the mayor. So the 64 would be the number of full-time people in HR when many of my changes had already been incorporated. So to make the numbers make sense, you really need to go back to the March budget for HR, which would have been the full number inclusive of D&I HR, and start subtracting from there. Because the 64 number really only allows for one change that hasn't been put in there yet, and that's the LR position. The rest of the changes were already in there before finance pulled that number.
Okay, I'm still a little confused though. The full-time change includes 7 positions transferred from other business units. So those 7 last year in March would have been in somebody else's business unit, correct? So you wouldn't have actually been, some of those 64 would have been approved in another business unit, and it wouldn't have been 64 FTEs. It would have been 57 or 58, depending on what you do with the one for this year, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So overall, it's the one. And thank you for the I was going to ask about the D&I. That's very clear. So that's the main clarification I had. On the long-term service award, I'm looking forward to my 35-year pin. And I hope that you'll bring it to my mantelpiece where I'll be sitting in one of my kids' rooms by then. So thank you very much. That's all I have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Councillor Mancini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Caroline, thank you for that well-done presentation, as always. Truly appreciated. You alluded in your presentation about really only having 2 key KPIs, training attendees and new health files received. And, you know, for me, I look at HR and there's a number of ways that identifies what HR is doing and where they're improving or where there's a gap. Where are we across the board? And I didn't see it in your presentation when it comes to all the business units and grievances overall. You know, we look at grievances in previous years. Are we at the same number? Are we decreasing? Is there an increase? Do you have any sense of that, where that is?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. Thanks for the question. We are holding with grievances right now. I can certainly pull the exact number, or Laura's on the call and she can provide us with the exact number, but we are holding. So we haven't seen any huge increases. Laura Nolan, do you want to speak to that before I tell a lie here?
Thank you, Caroline. Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the Mr. Chair, to the councillor. Yeah, Caroline's correct. We tend to have an average of around 50 to 60 a year, and we haven't seen a trend up or down over the last year. So we have ebbs and flows always, but it's consistent with previous years.
So in HR, are there goals around number of grievances? Is that a measurement that you go by? So you're holding, which is good. It's better than an increase. Is there a strategy in how you reduce the numbers from 50 to 60, you get it below that?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, we try not to set goals around grievances because they are influenced by so many different factors. And it used to be in HR that you would, you'd look at an LR specialist and you'd say, oh my gosh, they only have 5 grievances. What an amazing job they're doing with their union. But in fact, that sometimes indicates that they're not actually pushing the envelope or moving forward on things that need work. So we try never to set those goals. There are times too leading up to negotiations where you will see 50 grievances hit the table in preparation. And so there, there's ebbs and flows like that. But certainly when we're looking at individual files, if we do see a spike in grievances that we can't explain, that is something that we would look into immediately.
And the collective agreements this year coming up, we have 3, is that correct?
We have 2 open right now, and we right now are open with police and crossing guards. We are moving into transit and SUPI, and I'm missing one, Laura.
IAFF fire.
Oh my heavens, fire.
So not much left for the rest of the year for you guys to do then. That's
Not
good.
a thing. We got our feet up.
Thank you, Caroline and your team for your work. Paul, Mr. Chair, thank you, sir.
Not a problem. Thank you very much. I don't see any further questions in the chat, so I'm going to take a couple of minutes. If anybody would like to put something in there, then feel free. You have mentioned, let me see now where to go with this. You are going to be bringing on an LMS. Who will have access to that LMS? Will it be everybody in HRM or those working in the corporate offices? Who will have access to it?
Mr. Chair, thank you for the question. So the LMS is part of our larger business transformation project. It involves rolling out an LMS system that will be for the whole organization. We are currently working with our corporate partners to determine exactly what that looks like. So it may be slightly different in phase 1. So for example, fire or police have very sophisticated training programs. And it's not so easy to transfer those things in, and sometimes it's not the best idea either. So it will be a phased-in approach, but it is intended, as are all the pieces of SAP for HR, to be organizational-wide. Okay,
thank you. And you had mentioned that you have just about 4,000 training program participants. Do you have a target for that? And also, how many employees do we have at HRM? I think I know the number, but I would just appreciate confirmation.
Mr. Chair, we are between 36 and 3,800 employees. The training target that we had set for this year was extremely low. We felt that closing the corporate training program would cut our training down to next to nothing. And in fact, we gave up almost our entire training budget with that in mind. But that didn't happen. So to get to 4,000 is about double of where I thought we would be. The training department, again, managed to move some training to virtual instructor-led training as well as online training much faster than expected. So really that accounted for a good 1,000 of that number that, really, I mean, we'll have to set a huge target next year if things are anywhere near normal, because apparently they can train in any circumstances. So it's very high from what we expected.
Right. Okay, and that's fantastic to hear. One final question. You had talked about the number of contract negotiations that are currently ongoing. I'm wondering, on an average span, how many would be going on? I'm not saying that 2020 was an average year, but in an average year, how many would be going on?
So, Mr. Chair, that of course is impacted by the term that you get in any given negotiation. So whether you're 2, 5, 6, whatever it looks like. But I will say that I worked in labor relations for a long, long time in HRM, and I don't actually recall there ever being a time when at least one wasn't open. So 5 open at once is it's a lot, but it's not surprising, and it will happen again for us, certainly. But we are never not negotiating. And that is obviously a significant draw in terms of research, time at the table, time away from managing the normal portfolio. We are always bargaining.
Fair. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On the same subject, 5 issues at collective bargaining. 5 different unions. Is there a lead table? Are they ever connected one to the other? And so in terms of if an agreement is settled at this rate, is there then the ripple effect into other agreements? And if that's the case, do we allow for like the managing that risk, the financial risk that might trickle down to other agreements within HRM? Thanks.
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor. So I will speak in generalized terms. We do not have partner agreements here at HRM. So as an example, there are organizations that will have one core agreement and then there'll be 3 or 4 different agreements attached to that. That is not the arrangement here at HRM. We have a separate union for police, a separate union for fire, a separate union for inside workers, a separate union for outside workers. So none of them are tied. And when we say we're at the table with 5 open negotiations, we are actually at the table with 5 separate unions with 5 separate negotiating tables open. Addressing your question around percentages and increases, anytime you settle a collective agreement, that increase influences not just collective agreements in your organization, but certainly in your sector and in your region as well. So there is always that impact, but they are not tied specifically together. There have been some strong connections in the past with police and fire. And I think I'll leave it at that so as not to say too much about that. I hope that answers your question.
It does a little. I guess I was just curious, is there any time that HRM would be considered a lead table, for example, so with a union?
Mr. Chair, through you to the councillor, our unions are standalone, I guess is the answer to that. So we wouldn't be sort of the lead table for other locals within that union. Our agreements are standalone.
Is that okay, Kathy? Does that satisfy?
Oh, yes, my apologies. Yes, thank you. That's
no
great.
problem. Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other names in. Go ahead. We have the question call. Over to the clerk.
Beginning with District 13, Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you. Voting yes.
14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
15, Chair Russell.
In favor.
16, Deputy Mayor Audit.
Voting yes.
1, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Voting in favor of the motion.
District 2, Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
3, Councillor Kent.
In favor.
4, Councillor Purdy.
In favor.
5, Councillor Austin.
In favor.
6, Councillor Mancini.
Voting in favor of the motion.
7, Councillor Mason. Councillor Mason.
Yes.
District 8, Councillor Smith.
4.
9, Councillor Cleary. Councillor Cleary. District 10, Councillor Morse.
In favor.
11, Councillor Cuddle.
In favor.
12, Councillor Stoddard.
In favor of the motion.
13, Councillor Lovelace.
In favor of the motion.
14, Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
And Mayor Savage.
Yes.
And Councillor Cleary, just to confirm that was a yes from you. Thank you.
Okay, so that motion passes. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Ms. Blair Smith, for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Our next motion on the table, the next business unit, is the Legal and Legislative Services. And so I have pasted the motion into the chat. If somebody could read the motion and somebody else second it.
I'll read the motion.
Go ahead.
That the Budget Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to incorporate the legal and legislative services proposed 2021-22 budget and business plan as set out and discussed in the December 29th, 2020 staff report and supporting presentation by staff into the draft 2021-22 operating budget.
Thank you. Can I?
Lovelace.
Thank you. So now again, we have the presentation. Over to the legal team.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Budget Committee. John Traves, I'm the Municipal Solicitor and Executive Director of Legal and Legislative Services. And joining me today to assist with this, and actually every year in putting this together, is Karen Marr. Karen, I think you're there across the table from me. I can see you. Turn your camera, and Ian McLean, the Municipal Clerk, who can answer any questions coming out of the Clerk's office. So we'll run through our presentation, and then we'll see what questions that arise from there. So page 1, our mission is to provide high quality professional services to the municipality in keeping with HRM's core values and council priorities. So we report to the CAO, and we are committed to advancing regional council and the administrative priority outcomes. And this is achieved through a delivery of professional support to the municipality through legal, risk, and insurance services, as well as administrative and legislative support. I'll use the CAO's comment because I quite liked it, which is to say that we're involved in issues management to a large extent. Next please. So the three key service areas, just to recap, and I know that councillors are aware of this from the onboarding and some of the discussions we have. There are legal services that I tend to head up. In addition to the business unit overall, there is the Office of the Municipal Clerk, which is led by Ian McLean, as I said, and Risk and Insurance Services, which is led by Joel Plater. And I did want to make a note of that because I did want to talk a little bit later on in the presentation about insurance, because I know that there is some media attention and obviously some pieces that are rising out of the insurance generally right across Canada and North America. And so within legal services, we have 4 teams comprised of litigation, prosecutions, and solicitor services, which is broken down further into a municipal and administrative law group, and then a real property and a corporate commercial law group. Within the municipal clerk's office, there's 5 sections: administration, legislative services, elections, access and privacy, and the corporate information management and archives group. And the clerk's office supports meetings of regional council, committees of the whole, budget committee, the 4 community councils, 6 standing committees, and then 17 additional advisory boards and committees. And I will talk, as I said, a little bit more about risk and insurance services this year, and you'll see in some of our upcoming goals, we will be transitioning enterprise risk from the finance and corporate planning office to Joel's shop. And given staffing levels, this will take a bit of time to get up and running. So what about us? Slide 3, please. Some of the data and information that's sort of showing a little bit of what we've been doing. Despite the pandemic and the effects of that on service delivery with various associated lockdowns, etc., in fiscal 2021, our business unit will review approximately 400 reports, process an estimated 685 FOIPOP requests, and manage an anticipated around 1,320 claims through risk and insurance services. With the support of ICT, we feel that we reasonably successfully transitioned to an online council and committee meeting structure, but recognize there's more work to be done, and in fact, the limitations of Microsoft Teams is quite apparent, and so there is now ongoing work with respect to pursuing a Zoom or other solution, and that's currently underway as we speak. For 2020-21 fiscal year, 39 regional council, including COUNT budget meetings, will have been held to keep the municipality functional during the pandemic. And I want to recognize in particular April Stewart and Phoebe Ray, who are instrumental in this. I don't think people understand that given the licensing and the structure of Microsoft Teams, there are only 2 individuals who are licensed to broadcast those programs on Microsoft Teams, and those 2 individuals have managed every meeting in terms of what is being broadcast, and that is one of the challenges that we are facing as we continue through the COVID, which is why I think alternative solutions are so important to us. In addition, obviously, numerous community council, advisory committee, other meetings are supported by the clerk's office. For your information, the clerk's office processes approximately 1,800 pieces of correspondence annually, which are all logged, reviewed, and distributed to regional council and HRM business units as required, and processes an additional 580 plus or minus documents that require execution, signing, and documentation by the municipality, generally by the mayor and clerk. Our business unit supports the regional councils, they said, COW community councils, and additionally the council's advisory committees. Much of what our business unit does is mandated by law or driven by external factors. Think of claims as an example. But one of our core functions on the legal side is to do what we can to assist to ensure that the business and municipality is carried out in accordance with the law and be in a position to give advice to council. And so that's why we end up reviewing so many of the reports that come through to council. In addition to these items, obviously, we have been active in some of the major property transactions that have been ongoing, including Bloomfield, Annapolis lawsuit, the organics contract, and of course Cogswell, all drivers in terms of what has been going on in the business unit this year. Next slide 4, please. So our successes, clearly the successful completion of the 2020 municipal election, highest voter turnout since 2004 at 128,160 residents. This is a 29% increase in voter turnout, over the 2016 election. The election was delivered on time, under budget, and safely within a pandemic. A significant update and uptick in telephone and internet voting. And I think that, the municipality, in particular our business unit, is very proud to see a general neutral council as a result of the efforts over the last 2 election cycles by all parties to encourage and to encourage candidates and to identify and break down barriers to participation in the election process generally, not just on gender basis, but on other areas in which there are barriers. In terms of governance, we have rolled out the revised municipal records and retention plan, and quite proud of that. This assists the organization in its legal obligations around retention of government records, and is one of the items that I will talk to in terms of my staffing changes for this year. And lastly, with the assistance ICT, as I indicated on the last slide, we had transitioned to a virtual council meeting, expanded to include web streaming, broadcast services for improved public engagement, but recognizing Microsoft Teams has not been the ideal solution, and that improving that virtual meeting experience is critical to our mission, particularly in the clerk's office. So what are our current and planned initiatives for this upcoming year? Transfer of enterprise risk management to risk and insurance services, as I mentioned previously. This will be an assumed responsibility for the risk group, and this is in an effort to better anticipate and manage risks. The municipality will complete the development of a risk management framework to anticipate, manage, and mitigate both the enterprise and the corporate risks. Across the organization, risks are evaluated and appropriate risk mitigation plans and responses are developed and will be included in business and strategic plans that are being brought forward. This is essentially to operationalize the strategy that has been ongoing and set up by the Finance and ICT group led by Wendy Lyons. So we will, as I mentioned previously, seek to review and refresh the Councillor Code of Conduct, which is targeted for the 4th quarter in this upcoming year. After awaiting a response from the Federation of Nova Scotia Municipalities in 1920, and basically in an effort to fairly and effectively deal with the public and councillor complaints, Legal Services will resume the review of the Councillor's Code of Conduct, as well as work with councillors for their input to develop recommendations on not only the code, but also some service guidelines that will assist the public in understanding what is or is not a code of conduct complaint, so that those can be dealt with, fairly and expeditiously. The election process and procedures manual will be created and finalized. Hopefully, this is targeted for the fourth quarter of 2020-23. It is a 2-year project. The clerk's office, in cooperation with the Organizational Performance Excellence Group, will assess lessons learned from the 2020 municipal election in order to develop detailed process documentation to be implemented for future general and special elections. It's important to document that so that it doesn't matter who's in place, that we will have those processes and be able to build on those going forward. And we will also be working finally with access and privacy and corporate information management to investigate new virtual learning technologies for the delivery of updated education and training programs on behalf of the clerk's office around our obligations with respect to both the protection of privacy, which is critical, and with respect to the freedom of information aspects of this, all of which tie into the importance and to the municipality of openness and transparency, yet still protecting where needed. So slide 6, our key performance indicators. Traditionally, we have not had a lot. We are a responsive entity within the HRM writ large. We respond to the requests for service from the business units and from the claims that come outside. One of those critical ones, because it is mandated by law, is the turnaround time on freedom of information requests, which are required by law to be handled within 30 days. Performance has been negatively impacted this year due to the business units having to prioritize operational requirements and the challenges in getting into to deal with and review paper and other hard copy files. However, all applicants were kept informed of progress and in general have been very supportive given the impact of COVID. FOIPOP, and I will, as I mentioned, talk about this in a few minutes as well, has been impacted by the staffing levels in FOIPOP. And the challenge here is that this organization runs on a lot of paper, and this is a very labor-intensive job to go through and respond within 30 days based on the information that's being provided. And it is burning the staff out. So my operating budget. For the first time in 7 years, I am very happy to tell you that I'm not looking for any additional monies beyond the budget that's been provided me in line with council's direction. To that extent, our 2020-21 budget has been in a holding pattern, but some of the highlights of it, I would suggest, is we are seeing a significant decrease in our revenues this year. You will see there, and that's dealt with in the next slide when I get to it. But there are 3 new positions which have been approved and are in my budget for this upcoming year. Overall, our increases are related to staffing. About 94 to 96% of our budget is salary and compensations. We're essentially a service-driven organization rather than delivering on capital projects or otherwise. If I turn to my operating budget on page 8, you will see at the bottom, as I mentioned, my total revenues are down almost $250,000. This relates to the recoveries which we were seeing from the insurance company with respect primarily to Annapolis, where the document production phase of this program has now ended and we're starting to get into more of the discovery side of it. And so despite some of our successes, we still are responding to that case together with our insurer. So where are we? Relatively speaking, we are right-sized for the organization in its current state. Just shy of $1 billion overall HRM budget and $160 million in capital expenditures. I can tell you with some degree of confidence, while we're pressed in areas, unless you are seeking to significantly increase either capital expenditures, which would require more legal work to help get that out the door, or operationally things like to staff up significantly in planning development with more planners who require, assistance. then we're in relatively good shape and are not looking for any increases. In terms of my staff counts at page 9, slide 9. So I was quite happy to have Caroline go first to explain her one position change with 7 positions moving here and there, because it gave me the confidence to explain my reduction of 0.3. So how does that work? As an example, when we look at the seasonal casual term, we have a reduction within our budget of 0.3 of a position. That's accomplished, frankly, with the ending of one temp admin support, which was 0.2 of a position, the conclusion of an intern archives position at 0.3 with the finalization of the project, and the conclusion of an intern in the PGR customer expert term. What's PGR stand for? Somebody tell me. Karen's shaking her head. She doesn't know either off the top of my head. Anyway, that was 0.8. And so as those positions became vacant, we were able to fill an archive technician's position, which is a full-time position. And that led us into a 0.3 reduction overall in seasonal casual term. On the full-time component of that, as you can see from the notes on the slide, there is a full-time senior digital information management analyst in the corporate information management, that's Records Center. So that was being funded by capital in last year's budget. That capital project is now stood up and will be an ongoing item to run, and the staff person that was associated and paid for from that now becomes part of my regular budget. That's not a new position. It's been there. It's just simply a transfer now into the regular budget, and has been accommodated by, by working our magic, as it were, and staying within the budget we're given. In addition, there are 2 new administrative positions approved for access and privacy, subject to council's approval of the budget, which will help in terms of taking off some of the load on the overtime and the work that's going on to get back to meeting those privacy and information requests that we're struggling with. Currently, we have people who are working significant amounts of overtime and essentially looking for work elsewhere. If we're not able to staff that, fundamentally, we are going to have challenges in terms of our ability with respect to openness and transparency.
Volunteer.
I'm sorry, I'm being pointed out. A lot of that has been voluntary overtime. So they've been excellent to keep it going, but there's too much paper. And so that is why, in terms of where I've moved my budget within that overall budget target, we've settled on those 2 positions as being needed. And so those are the changes that are planned and subject to approval of the budget. The issue of the summary of changes is on slide 10. So the positions and the usual salary adjustments line is in the compensation changes. The other budget adjustments that we have in there is that there is an increase in the cost with respect to elections. That's essentially a transfer from the elections budget back into our own regular budget. Now that the election is over and we're closing out that account, that position gets transferred every 4 years into elections to assist and deal with the elections, and at the end of it, it's transferred back into our regular budget. We have some COVID-19 related costs, principally around the CART costs due to community council public hearings, additional cleaning at Records Center, and PPE for business unit, those sorts of areas. CART is an important program. It is not inexpensive, though. It runs about $16,000 extra in our budget to deal with providing that through the community council public hearings, which are not necessarily able to be held in person. So that's sort of a moving piece. In terms of miscellaneous adjustment, those are administrative costs which are added back to the corporate information management budget. They relate to contract and professional services. And essentially our adjustment to balance reflects the captured vacancy savings in the year. I indicated at the outset I would talk briefly about insurance. Insurance is an issue right across across Canada. I don't usually talk about insurance premiums in my budget because they are provided for under fiscal, and that's where the funding is in terms of the what we refer to as the insurance reserve. But we are responsible for negotiating and for maintaining that insurance for the municipality. We have seen a significant rise in insurance premiums across the industry. And so, I'll talk a little bit about that. Risk and insurance staff are responsible to secure the renewal of the municipal insurance portfolio, which includes coverage for Halifax Regional Water and the Halifax Library Commissions and other agency boards and commissions for which we were responsible or have agreed or are able to cover with insurance in some way. That can be challenging. You need to have an insurable interest, but there are ways to in some cases, to cover that. The total cost for 2020-21 was $3,816,690. This was an increase of just over $1.1 million, or 45% over the expiring premium from 2019 to 2020. And this policy runs from June 1st to May 31st, so our costing figures are based on that. We saw within that overall change, we saw a 97% increase in general liability and errors and omissions coverage, which is approximately 1/3 of our overall premium. Why is this? It's generally led by other jurisdictions where there's been an increase in the frequency and of the severity of the claims being experienced. Over the last few years, insurers have been called to pay for claims resulting from floods and fires in Western Canada and several large collisions involving the Transit Authority in Ottawa. This has been felt throughout the industry. We have been advised anecdotally that the resulting increases in other jurisdictions have been as high as 1,500%. At 45%, we are at the low end of what has been reported in respect of increases by municipalities. Why is that? Well, first of all, we don't have municipal housing as a responsibility. We don't own municipal housing. We are not first responders in terms of paramedics, and we don't have a primary health and community services mandate in HRM. The success factors, and we have been approached by other municipalities in terms of what can we share in terms of how it is that we're seeing what is a relatively low increase despite this cost, has been driven by 4 factors: CCTV on transit and in facilities to verify claims, the telemetry on vehicles, which gives us, it's a black box, essentially tells us where our vehicles are and are not at the time of an accident, how fast they're going, whether they're moving at all, that sort of thing. An in-house legal team, which actually has that knowledge and experience to act on our behalf, recognizing that a large percentage of the claims that we see are under our $100,000 deductible and therefore are being responded to by us at the municipality as a self-insurer. And the more items that we can actually respond to effectively that do not get out of hand and roll up beyond that deductible, the better. We actually will carry matters slightly over the deductible in order to maintain some level of control and to ensure that there isn't a settlement just for the sake of settlements basis. So if there's a claim of $120,000 as an example, and our deductible is $100,000, the insurance company, if they took it over, is really only looking at a $20,000 claim. They may easily settle that, notwithstanding the fact that that's a $100,000 hit to our bottom line. So we manage these things very carefully. And then, last and most important is the embedded and the trained and dedicated risk team led by Joel that gets involved from the ground up in terms of assessing all sorts of things. Our latest last year is we did find some money in the tail end of our budget to acquire a what's it called?
Infrared camera.
Infrared camera. Thank you, Karen, which will allow us to assess some of the older buildings. If we can assess the wiring in older buildings and get a sense of comfort that poses no risk, it allows us to argue for a lower premium in terms of our insurance coverage for those sorts of buildings. So pressures. as I said, we're not looking for anything additional to our budget, but I did want to highlight for you that, you know, depending on what goes, we are never very clear in terms of what the potential is for increasing outside legal costs. We usually carry a budget of around 175,000 for outside legals. And obviously I can't get into the details of the specific cases, but in addition to that, there are expenditures that come out of either capital projects, charged directly to a capital project, for example, potentially Cogswell and some of the items that are there. We do have outside counsel for items such as potential claims around expropriation and the aspects of that, but also in terms of some of the litigation files. In 1920, that was a total of an additional $577,000, and this year to date, we're tracking around $696,000 up till January. And those come from the insurance reserve generally in terms of those expenditures to assist with responses to some of the claims that were faced. So that is the potential pressure that exists there as well. I've noted the pressure on overtime with respect to the resources required to run virtual meetings anticipated. Historically, overtime in the clerk's office runs around $13,000 a year. And that's just a function of if there's any vacancies or if there's a number of meetings that are unexpectedly have to get booked and go forward. This year to date, we're around $47,000 in terms of overtime. So that's just the nature of responding and ensuring that we continue to staff the outside legal meetings. The legal fees for the outside are actually recouped directly from the insurance company. Karen's reminding me, not out of our reserve. So that's a flow through, but it is an item in terms of where that goes. And if it's not an outside law firm that we've retained, then we do look to see if we can negotiate a cost recovery for our time in legal that's spent on that sort of activity. And that, thank you very much, is my presentation. Happy to take any questions that folks may have.
Well, John, thank you very much for the comprehensive presentation, and I would also like to put a shout out specifically to April and Phoebe, who have done a phenomenal job of taking care of our meetings, even though we might have messed it up a little bit, but we're doing our best as well. So it's over to the councillors, and at this point, Councillor Austin. Councillor Austin, are you there?
Next.
I'm here, but on mute.
There we go.
The pandemic just started yesterday. So I was saying thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, John, for the presentation. I have two questions, one relating to the election piece and one relating to the ongoing virtual meetings. And so I'll start with the meeting piece. I hear from your presentation that there's some work underway on that. I sort of feel I feel like we've had a bit of a situation with this where there's never been a formal ask to council, because we were very much all scrambling to try and make this up as we went along, dealing with the totally unanticipated pandemic that we were all confronted with. But I kind of feel like, and I might be mischaracterizing the situation, so I'd like your insight on it. We never formally asked you to bring back something, but you guys never formally offered us anything. So it's kind of like, well, council didn't ask, but also staff didn't volunteer. I presume Microsoft is in the business of selling licenses. Why isn't it just a simple thing in the budget of just including more Teams licenses so we can get on with, not having all of this land on the burden of just 2 staff to manage all of our meetings?
Thank you for the question. That's a great question. Look, in hindsight, it's very easy to think of things that we could have done differently or changed. I think you'll recall the initial direction from the minister was essentially that we could not meet in public. And at the time, the Microsoft Teams solution, was the corporate solution, or is the corporate solution. And, I think we're a little bit of a boiled frog. We didn't realize, given the virtual nature of the meetings, just what sort of an impact that was having on two individuals. It's very challenging to run because essentially it lands somewhere between, an IT professional and a clerk's role in terms of actually producing the meeting. And I think by the time we got two trained up and got it running effectively, there continued to be sorts of hiccups as we went through the regional council meetings, the others, which gave us some concerns about trying to broaden that and bring more people in. And so we landed on the two most senior people. We went through a clerk's competition, and I think one of Ian's first jobs that he's sort of drilling down in is, well, what makes sense in terms of adequately staffing these and making it go. So, a shout out entirely to them. I think the other part of it is, there was not a good understanding of the impact that we would see in bringing councillors up to speed, a new council up to speed on the technology, on how this would all work and tie together. And so it wasn't just clerk's office issue. It became one of a joint ICT and clerk's office of how to work within the corporate solution, because there's no doubt we could go out and buy hundreds of Zoom licenses, but at a substantive cost. And it didn't really seem, I think, at the beginning of this, worth pursuing if in fact our corporate solution would work. And now, we've seen that there continues to be challenges, and that's why we're working to see what else can be done in terms of another solution.
So in your budget then, is there money basically allocated to buy whatever the solution ends up being, to buy the additional licenses, whatever it ends up being, to actually make this effective? Because I think we're at the point, from a public point of view, where we're not able to hold the meeting virtually, but maybe you get a recording later on if you ask the clerk's offices. We're kind of past that point of that being an acceptable solution.
And that's an ICT budget issue. Whether or not it's specifically budgeted, right now we don't know what, if any, cost would be associated. So it's a little bit of a moving target in terms of what efforts we would even make in terms of procurement. There are a lot of, you can log in to certain meetings from outside through the web Zoom component. What we would need in terms of actually running a meeting is currently being explored as we speak.
Okay, I guess what I'm going for, John, is just if you need resources to actually make this work, now is the time, right? We're in budgeting to identify that, because I don't want it to be 5 months down the line. Well, I'm sorry, councillor, we can't hold the meeting in public because we don't have any money in the budget for that thing. Like, we should either do it, or there should be a plan that we're going to look at this as an out-year item during it. That's my 2 cents.
Right. I believe that within my current budget, and assuming we do move to a solution like Zoom, we will have sufficient personnel, all right, and that we won't have the continued pressure on overtime. Where I think the issue becomes one is there sufficient money in ICT to acquire the licenses? And of course, within finance and ICT, they have the fiscal. There is pieces there, but that would be a question for Ms. Fraser, I think, when her budget comes forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I just want to take off my city council hat for a second and put on my IT hat and remind people that when we were initially looking at this 8 months ago, there were a number of concerns about Zoom because it was just so new to everything, that we landed on a platform that worked. Does it work well? Is it the ideal one? That's up for debate at some other time, but it worked, and I agree that it makes sense to look at something else. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair, and John, for the presentation. I want to dig in a little deeper on the the virtual meetings, but I'll ask my simple questions first. One is and you detailed it a little bit more after I actually asked the question around the new position, and as you said, it kind of bounced out with some of the terms and positions that came up. But what I'm wondering is, in the change aspect of the budget on page 2, it mentions new position and salary adjustments 751. So is the new positions, are those different from what was currently in the budget? And with all the changes of the positions and where they came from, it looks as if it's new positions, or is this actually new money that you're looking for? And then what is salary adjustments?
Okay. Thank you for the question. So salary adjustments are the general cost of living or performance, which is an open question, but that's the monies that are set aside to deal with the general increase that you would see year over year. In terms of the new positions, there are, at the end of the day, a total of 2.7 net changes in the positions. So there's 3 planned new positions which are within the budget, not something that I'm looking for additional monies from council on. The first of those is reflective of that transfer of the person and the monies from a capital project to now the ongoing work that will go to stand up and support that corporate information management technology piece, which is in the clerk's office. So that was a project. It was an IT solution that we bought, and now continue. You need input. You need to run the data and to run that program. In last year's budget, that was taken from the capital budget. That now becomes regularized and moved over. So technically, that is a new position, and needs to be funded within the budget. But that position's already filled. So there is a person that's now moved over, and it's just the matter of having bought the product, we've got to maintain it. Additionally, within the budget, which is all part and parcel of the budget target given to me by finance, are the 2 positions that we talked about in terms of meeting the obligations in access and privacy and responding to those requests that are coming through. As you recall from the data I showed you, we are starting to see a reduction in meeting that legislated target of a 30-day turnaround time. The OPIC office provincially is actually staffing up and starting to push, and they have hired a contractor who is now starting to review those outstanding requests. And so there will be added pressure, not only from the the access requests that we're starting to see ramp up again after people have gotten used to COVID, and the fundamental struggle in terms of getting the information from the business units, which are still actively engaged in business in a COVID time. And so the salary and benefits item is 151,000, essentially.
For access and privacy more.
Yeah, for access and privacy more than anything else. So that across 75 employees, sort of covers, where we sit for those 3 positions, essentially. I haven't really addressed the seasonal casual. That's just a balancing back and forth, and it was a net number. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that answers it. So going to the piece with the virtual meeting, so you're asking as an over item $30,000 to be put into the budget so you can deal with the no?
No, I'm not asking. What I'm advising council is we believe that we can handle this in budget. However, it's a potential pressure in terms of my meeting my budget at the end of this year. Whether or not I can get there, I would say that those 2 items are items which potentially will put a pressure on us in terms of meeting our budget target. We've been very successful with Karen's help in terms of meeting our budget every year that I've been here. We have not gone over a budget in terms of our expenditure. We're not looking for any additional money. We're just saying to you, look, if we continue to have a lot of overtime, then we may end up being pressed to find the money to pay for that, given that I'm about 94% salary and compensation salary. I can't necessarily cut somewhere else. There's nowhere to find that money. So that may give pressure. Will that, in the grand scheme of things in a municipal budget, make a difference? No. Let's be frank, that's very small amount. My budget may not be met, But am I confident there's enough money in the overall budget to pay the overtime? Yes, obviously.
So my question is similar to Sam's, and I'll leave it here because this isn't the time to say it. But if you want to ask us for more money to deal with virtual meetings, sure, please do that. But I think we need to, because I know everyone in the clerk's office and your team are doing their best to meet not only the public's ask, but council ask to make sure that meetings are held in a way that people can access. But there are resources that are needed, and I know that it'd be great to kind of get an update or have a discussion at some point in budget of this is the wish list if we wanted to make this efficient, what we need to do it. And the House of Commons uses Zooms now, and they're operating fine and et cetera. So I don't know when and where that conversation should happen, but I know that it is happening, but also there's resources needed as well.
We'll touch base with Ms. Fraser. Those costs of the Zoom application would come out of that budget, and certainly that's something we'll make sure is raised. Microsoft Teams Microsoft has, in my understanding, advised us Microsoft Teams is not the ideal solution for what it is that we are trying to do in terms of a broadcast. And so, yes, we do believe that an alternative solution and likely Zoom is required. And as I said, that would be something that would be in the finance and ICT budget.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Lovelace.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Thank you, John, for this really great comprehensive report and presentation. It's so interesting to see all of the work that your unit does. And certainly in looking at the numbers for the FOIPOP, I was actually thinking it might be a little bit more. People have more time on their hands. Maybe they're looking for more information. But on that note, with regards to FOIPOP, and I will echo that Teams may not be the most appropriate content management solution for us for broadcasting. But I have to ask this, John, when it comes to appropriate, accessible information and access to the content. Certainly, we've heard that the website isn't really doing what it needs to do in order to provide quick access to information. Is there an opportunity for the municipality to engage a stronger enterprise content management system that would effectively reduce the number of FOIPOP applications that we have, and also provide access to information that people are looking for by, providing this information in a way that it does retract that personal and private information? Is this something that the municipality has considered?
Sorry, yes. Sorry, Mr. Chair, through you, I've got Karen Myers trying to give me the hook, I think. So yes, clearly there's a couple of things to it. I would suggest a lot of what, I understand we see in terms of FOIPOP requests is personal information. And so, a larger enterprise, control management system is not going to solve that, because you have to review each and every document in terms of what is there and what can be released. Yeah, and so in 2015, we recognized the need for an enterprise solution. That has been a struggle to procure. It is going to take a few more years, but it is underway now and is going forward. The other piece of it, though, that and when you raise the website is a good point, which is that routine disclosure and open data assists in many ways in terms of the research sorts of questions. And the clerk and I have had some discussions already in his onboarding around the need to take another look at what is readily available. As an example, compensation when I started here was not published. We now have a transparency page where a lot of stuff can be accessed, but there's certainly areas that can be done more there. But there is enterprise solution that has been sourced. We are working towards that. But in the interim, and even with it, it's just so paper intensive. We're going to need, because of the way that we've got all these historic files, that we need that staff in my budget to make that make that work.
Okay, that makes sense. I appreciate that. And my next question is on elections, and in particular the new political contributions bylaw that was put in place. And I'm just wondering whether or not that is also part of your review to see if there are ways, since this was the first election for that bylaw, are there ways for us to strengthen that or to review that?
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Off the top of my head, I don't recall, but I anticipate there would be a report coming back to council in terms of what we saw with respect to that, but I just have to go back and check. If there isn't, it's certainly something then that, you know, if council wishes to make a motion and seek, you know, some input on that. That was a relatively new bylaw that was put in place. And if council wishes some additional follow-up, we can certainly do that. I'll have to go back and see if there's an outstanding request. Ian, do you know?
So we are looking at the election processes from top to bottom. That would include the campaign financing as well. So I don't believe there's an official request for a report to council on that, but the campaign disclosures would become a part of that as we are looking at the election processes from the beginning to the end.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I do see value in that, just so we can evaluate its use and potentially there may be gaps in it. Thank you so much.
And to confirm, there is a report on that coming on the process on the specific to the campaign disclosures that will be coming later on this year as well.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, John. Last year at council, when you came, we had a bit of a battle. You were looking for 9.7 or 9.4% increase at that time, and I couldn't go there. And I can't remember exactly where we ended up on it, but probably somewhere in the middle. But
I think you won.
I'm not sure about that. But anyway, this year I don't see a large problem with this, John. I appreciate the work that you've done. I think last year as well, you would have had GRIA under your wing, right? And this is a new year without, that would be with the CAO now. I think one point I would make, and this is more for people who are listening, is there's a sense that, you know, freedom of information is free, or virtually free, and in fact it costs money. I remember meeting with, was it Catherine Tully, used to be the Privacy Commissioner, John, in Nova Scotia. She came to see me a few years ago, and she told me that we did really well on these requests, much better than the province did. And I think she made that point publicly. But it is a cost of being in a democratic society and priding ourselves on our transparency and openness that we do need to get back to get these requests handled. And sometimes they're difficult. We all get notes saying that somebody's asking for information on this or that, and you might think, well, I don't understand, I have nothing to do with that, but you have to go through the process and there's a cost to that. So we need to make sure that we keep that part of our democracy front and center. So I appreciate that. One thing, John, that you used to report on, I didn't see it this year, might have missed it, was the operating costs per lawyer. Do you have any thoughts on that for this year? Is it operating cost per in-house lawyer?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, Mayor. A few years ago, you will recall, we participated in a municipal benchmarking initiative, and so that came as part of that discussion as to where we sat vis-a-vis other municipalities. Overall, we were lower than many, if not most. And, you know, I still run our operating costs per lawyer, and it's around, Karen, do you recall?
It's under $200.
It's you know, I hate to admit it publicly, it's in the $200 an hour range, given where we are. And so that is when you factor in our cost to provide, you know, salary compensation and office space and management bit. So it's a very cost-effective way, which is why most municipalities have beefed up internal legal and risk and management in terms of responding. But that, as you well know, is not always able to be utilized in areas where we don't have the expertise, or there's a conflict, or quite frankly, we just don't have enough people to do it. We still have to send legal work out.
The last year I saw you gave us was $131 per hour.
Yeah, and I just haven't updated that, but it's still under the $200 figure easily.
You and I have had this conversation at budget and other ways that we've got great lawyers and great staff, but we also have great law firms in Halifax, and we can hire the expertise we need and not have to load them up and bring them on and have them on the payroll for 20 years. So there's a sort of a feeling out there, consultants are expensive and crazy, outside services. In my view, we serve a couple of purposes when you get the expertise you need. And I know you've worked with some lawyers in some of the recent files where we've achieved success with a combination of in-house and outside lawyers. I think it can be very cost effective and very effective to be using the legal firms in Halifax.
If I may, Mayor, if I may, just on that, and that's why I wanted to make the point in my presentation around slide 13 that although I've not traditionally spoken to those costs, to date we're spending close to $700,000 on excellent outside legal services on areas in particular that are very helpful to us, not just on litigation, but on expropriation and real property and other sorts of areas, and prosecutions.
Right. Agreed. Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thank you very much. Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Such an informative report and then presentation. I've got the report on one screen and the presentation on the other, and I'm trying to be able to see the little details. When we talk about the compensation and benefits, where it is the majority of the budget, and I look at the June change is 5.4, and I guess this is just to make sure that I understand it correctly. The 5.4% change is because June was a COVID budget in the middle, so the March budget and the 1.9% change, would individuals look at that and say, so the 1.9% change is like overall compensation and benefits. So it's not that, everybody that is in sort of your house has a 1.9% increase, right? And it should be interpreted that way.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Actually, it relates to the fact that we had positions that we didn't fill in order to meet our budget. And at the time we presented in March, although ultimately our numbers that came forward when we presented in March, we actually did have, I think, as the mayor mentioned, GRIA, of which 7 employees. So it's very hard to compare apples to apples in many ways.
Just sometimes when you look at this, people can make an assumption about what the percentage change is instead of seeing it as a very rolled up response to the changes.
It's a year-over-year change. I'm just getting a note from my dear friend, Miss Fraser. So it is a year-over-year change.
It is a year-over-year change.
Yeah, okay. Ultimately, yeah.
Okay, thanks for the clarification on that one. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Councillor Stoddart.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you, John, and your team for all of your hard work. As a new councillor, it was hard enough running a campaign during COVID, but for your staff to organize an election very well, my hat's off to you and your staff. Also, with only 2 staff, April and Phoebe, managing teams, that as well was excellence to the highest order. My question is, with the election staff reviewing the election books and information, will the new and returning councillors be asked for their input? Thank you.
Ian, do you want to take that one?
So as far as an overview and review of this, we would look internally at the processes that we have to follow and the requirements legislatively. And then absolutely that could be part of our processes to look into how some of the communications and pieces were. It's always interesting when you're doing election administration that you have to run the fine line between being a customer service-based organization but meeting an equitable and legislative requirement. But looking into some of those pieces is absolutely something we can look at doing.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to, if I may, Mr. Chair, recognize, Cheryl Murphy, who came back to the organization from retirement and took on this election. I would say, in terms of the election, it would be sort of a general thought from Cheryl and all those involved that at a certain point, there is value in council considering going all electronic and telephone. And so I realize that's for a different day, but we certainly sense that the increased voter turnout is partly responsible to the ease by which you can telephone vote. When you start to get to the election day, people tend to, I shouldn't say this in broad strokes, but there are those who put it off and then miss the opportunity because we have to cut off the electronic. But that I appreciate it is what it is, and we will continue to run the election in a way that the council desires and push that along. The only other thing I'd add, just because I would be remiss if I didn't take note, Nancy Dempsey is spectacular in terms of running the FOIPOP office. And, she has struggled in terms of the enterprise solution that she'd like to implement. And I know that she values the support and the feedback, coming out of council in terms of what is a very challenging job, let's be frank, in terms of responding to those requests. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I do think that the discussion about the mode of voting is certainly one that we should have.
Another day.
Yeah, another day. I agree. Councillor Austin, for your second time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And on the election piece, do we do a reserve transfer each year into the election fund so that it's all ready to be paid for every 4 years?
We do.
Okay, so there is a budget aspect to this, and I can't answer it off the top. I've raised this with our clerk already, so it's not going to be any surprise to Ian, my comments on that. There's a lot to celebrate in how the election went, that the turnout was up. There was a lot of good work done there, and that we managed to pull this off in a pandemic. Hats off to staff. However, you can't expect people to be miracle workers with resources that they don't have. We did have some, the electronic voting worked really well if you were on the list. If you were not on the list, we had insufficient resources by a wide margin to actually respond to people who were not on the list. I mean, I had more than one, and I know other councillors did, horror stories of people that called and called and called, and some of them got on the list and some of them didn't. And I know at least one in my district who was really upset because she's a serving forces member that wasn't here. Her only option to vote was online. And after being promised 4 times, well, we let her down. She didn't get to vote because we did not have the resources to adequately adjust our list as needed. So I'm hoping, and why I'm signing this here is, as part of our review, we will take a look not just at the successes, but also what went wrong in terms of that office, our ability to respond there. Keeping in mind that turnout was also up on the electronics, so there's probably more demand than anyone anticipated. Because if we don't identify that and plan for how we're not going to drop the ball on that piece in the future, that is going to have a budget element of what we're going to be putting into the reserve fund, presumably. So I really hope that when the debrief report on this election comes to council, that we can adequately cover that off, because otherwise I'm going to have to make a supplemental motion on it. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. So annually we put $715,000 into the election reserve, so that sort of runs over a 4-year rolling period. Financially, I don't think there was a challenge in the money, but to your points in terms of the lessons learned and what can be done better to address that is certainly clear. This year with COVID was a huge challenge. One of the issues I know that we faced was the size and the way in which we could actually stand up and manage a call center dealing with election calls with social distance spacing and the changing orders that were coming out of health. And so in hindsight, we could have done better, obviously. There were some failures there, and that'll have to get wrapped up in the final review.
Yeah, this year.
Sorry?
This year we increased.
Oh, sorry. It was increased this year to $750,000. I think last year was $415,000. So I don't believe financially it's an issue. It's really a matter of, in a COVID day, could we attract the people and could we staff up in terms of the space that was available, given that we had planned and rented space without COVID in mind.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other councillors in the chat who are interested in speaking. So once again, a shout out to April and Phoebe for managing the meetings as well as they have. It is phenomenal. So I'm going to hand it over to the clerk for the question.
We'll start with Councillor Blackburn and District 14.
Voting yes on the motion.
Councillor Russell,
In favor?
Councillor Outthit, Councillor Outthit,
I am here voting yes, thanks.
thank you. Councillor Daigle-Gammon,
Voting in favor of the motion.
Councillor Hensby,
Affirmative.
Councillor Kent,
In favor.
Councillor Purdy,
In favor of the motion.
Councillor Austin,
In favor.
Councillor Mancini,
Voting in favor of the motion.
Councillor Mason,
For the motion.
Councillor Smith,
For?
Councillor Cleary,
Yes.
Councillor Morris,
In favor.
Councillor Cuddle,
In favor?
Councillor Stoddard,
In favor of the motion.
Councillor Lovelace,
Voting yes.
and Mayor Savage.
Yep.
That motion's carried.
Super, thank you. So yeah, as the clerk mentioned, that motion has passed. So we are now on to the Office of the Auditor General. Can I have someone put the motion on the floor, please?
Certainly, I'll put the motion on the floor. Mr. Chair,
Okay.
I move that the Budget Committee directs staff to incorporate the Office of the Auditor General proposed 2021-22 budget and business plan as set out and discussed in the February 3rd, 2021 staff report and supporting presentation by staff into the draft 2021-22 operating budget.
I'll second it.
Councillor, who was the seconder?
Stoddard.
Stoddard, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And once again, we have a presentation, so it's over to the Auditor General.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Could I have the next slide, please? Thank you. So this slide just has a little bit of information about my office. It is an independent office and we have a bit of a different budget process than the rest of HRM does. We do provide our numbers to finance so that they can balance the budget that they're working on, but unlike the rest of HRM, the CAO is not involved in my office's budget, and that's for independence reasons. So it does go directly to Committee of the Whole as a budget request. You'll see our mission, vision, and values are on this slide. So the office does independent audits, and the idea that we're trying to achieve is to strengthen accountability and to encourage improved efficiency and effectiveness of programs. We do work to assist Regional Council in holding both itself and administration or management of HRM accountable for the use of public funds. Next slide, please. So this slide provides a little overview of the current year that we're almost finished at this point. Our budget is pretty much on target. As I go through the slides, you'll see that it looks like we're underspent for 2020-21. However, when we did the COVID budget reductions, my final approved budget was actually slightly larger than my budget ask when I came before Committee of the Whole when we did those COVID adjustments. And part of the reason there is my budget's pretty small in the overall scheme of HRM, and so finance may not have adjusted every single line item because for them it would have been a lot of work to adjust sort of $1,000 here and $2,000 there. So we did work towards an internal number that's a bit lower than what's in the slides, and we're pretty much on target to spend exactly that amount. 3 of the 4 audits that we had planned for 2020-21 are underway. We have an audit of HRP IT that will be released actually next week. That was on our list for 2019-20, but it started late in the year, and typically when an audit starts late in a fiscal year, it isn't released until sometime the following fiscal year. So that one overlapped into 2020-21. We've got 2 audits, one of Transit Technology Project Management and another of Accounts Payable that I expect will be released in the next few months. And we're just starting an audit of fire inspections. The release date on that one is yet to be determined. There is an audit in our audit priorities for the current year called IT Roles and Access that we have not started. The HRP IT audit was larger than we anticipated, and we just simply don't have the resources in a small office to do 2 really large IT audits at the same time. So that one has yet to begin. And with SAP projects underway and whatnot, that actually may be delayed a little. I do produce an annual report for the current year, so 2020-21, as well as my audit plans for the upcoming year, and that will be released in April. So you can expect to see me at an April meeting, those of you that are on audit and finance, talking about that document. We do have a full staffing complement in the office as of late January 2021. We did have some COVID savings where we kept 1 position vacant for around 9.5 months during the year, and we had a maternity leave that we didn't try to backfill, so that saved about 8 months from a salary perspective. However, of course, those vacancies did have an impact on the amount of audit work that we could complete in the year. We've released 3 reports so far in 2020-21, an audit of building permits and inspections, and 2 follow-up reports that cover 4 2018 and 2019 audits. So follow-up is a really important part of our work. It's what we use to provide assurance to council, really, that management is fixing identified issues as a result of audit. So we typically follow up around 18 months after we've completed an audit. With some scheduling considerations, we do like to try to do 2 or 3 at the same time from an efficiency standpoint. So sometimes people might get a little more than 18 months. And this year we followed up procurement, management of development approvals, Halifax Transit bus maintenance, and property tax management. The overall implementation rate for the recommendations was 88%, so 35 of 40 recommendations were implemented, and that's an excellent rate. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this slide deals with a new item for 2020-21. As I'm sure you'll know from previous budgets and from my current slide deck, my budget is mostly salaries. This particular new item for 2021-22, sorry, I cannot say the years in this decade with any level of success, is $71,100, and that's to contract an IT expert to assist us with an audit that we're planning. So as I stated, the HRP IT audit took longer than we thought it would. We're planning an IT audit at Halifax Water in 2021. I expect it to be more complex than the HRP IT audit was. I would like to do some additional testing in terms of an audit scope compared to what we did at HRP. We do have IT in-house knowledge, but this additional testing will require having an expert assist us, because that particular area is not something we have expertise in. I also believe that having an expert help with one audit will provide good knowledge transfer and help us to develop a more efficient approach to IT audits and help us create a template for future audits. We all know that cybersecurity is an ever-increasing risk, and no one is immune to that. Other cities have been hacked or have been victims of social engineering. You know, we've all heard of the fake CEO emails with urgent requests. And so I believe that we will need to do IT auditing on a go-forward basis every year, and I think hiring an expert for this one audit will help to provide a good template for that process going forward. I picked Halifax Water due to the risk. We'll look at their general IT environment, but we'll also look at their SCADA systems, which is what allows them to control their water processing systems. And those are certainly high-risk areas that could be seen as opportunities for cybersecurity attacks. Next slide, please. This slide just has my overall FTE count. So it's the same FTE count as the current year, although as I mentioned, we did have some vacancies for a period during the current year. Right now we're back to our 9.6. Next slide. This slide is an overview of the current year's original request, the COVID adjusted numbers, and then the 21-22 budget request. As I said previously, my budget is mostly salaries. In 2020-21, my approved budget was 91% salaries. In the 21-22 budget ask, if we include the $71,000 item that I just mentioned, if that was approved, I would be at 86% salaries, and that difference is really just due to that one contract funding request. So overall, some changes to my budget for 21-22. We have some increased money in training. We have 2 CPA students at the moment. We typically hire at the student level and train them in performance audit. It's very difficult to hire experienced performance auditors. It's not the same as financial statement audit, and it's not a skill set that's widely available. Despite increased training costs when we have students, we do find this approach saves money over time, because of course you hire a student at a lower level than what you would hire a professional at in terms of the salary that you pay them. So we have a career ladder that we move the students through for the first number of years that they're with the office, based of course on successful work and successful completion of courses. And then eventually they exit that career ladder and they're just part of the typical process that other HRM non-union staff would be for any salary changes. Next slide, please. Oh, I think we missed a slide. There's a slide missing that's supposed to be in there that shows the, oh, sorry, we skipped a slide ahead and I didn't realize we were, apologies. So this slide just shows the main categories year over year. It does not include the $71,100 request for a contract IT expert because that is a new item and so it's separate. And those salary changes that you see on there are really due to the fact that when we did the COVID adjusted budget, we decided not to try to backfill a maternity leave and we left a position vacant for a period of time in 2020-21 to achieve some savings, and now the mat leave is over and the position has been filled. So that's really the differences that are on this slide. Next slide. Thank you. And so that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have on my budget request.
Okay, thank you very much. As usual, please put your names into the chat if you would like to ask the Auditor General any questions. I will take the opportunity to speak to the difference between an IT audit and every other type of audit, in that with IT, the technology is moving faster and faster and faster all of the time. And so we would need to, I think, have someone who is working in that field all the time in order to be able to keep up to the latest in any IT risks. So I would gladly support that. I still don't see any names in the chat. That was my only comment. And with that, if somebody is interested in calling for the question. Thank you. I will hand it over to the clerk.
All right, beginning with yourself, Chair Russell.
Thank you. I am in favor.
Councillor Outfit.
I am in favor.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Oh.
I'm sorry, Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Voting in favor of the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
Councillor Kent.
In favor.
Councillor Purdy.
In favor.
Councillor Austin.
In favor.
Councillor Mancini.
Everybody's scared of the AG department, that's why there's no questions, but in favor.
Councillor Mason.
For the motion.
Councillor Smith.
For the motion, I heard it was something to do with martial arts. That's why no one has anything to say.
That's right.
Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
Councillor Morris.
In favor of the motion.
Councillor Cuddle.
In favor.
Councillor Stoddard.
In favor of the motion.
Councillor Lovelace.
Voting yes.
Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
And Mayor Savage.
Yes, and I think we have the best AG in Canada, by the way.
That motion carries.
Super. Thank you very much. Now, one of the items that got overlooked in the discussion is more of what was needed as far as the contract expert for the IT audit. If we are going to review this later on in the budget adjustment list, I would need a motion for that to be added. So I am wondering if someone would be interested in making a motion to add the contract expert for the IT audit, $71,100 as a one-time cost to the budget adjustment list.
Mr. Chair, it's Councillor Cleary, so moved.
Thank you very much. And do we have a seconder?
So Lovelace.
Second.
I think Councillor Lovelace was first. Okay, thank you. So is there any discussion on that motion? Okay, thank you. Can we call for the question, please? Oh, back over to the clerk.
Quick question, Paul.
Yes, go ahead. I'm not sure who.
Sorry for AG. I'm just for my curiosity more than anything. There's always some great discussion over our impact and our influence, if you will, over the Halifax Water Commission. They increases and regulations and this sort of thing are taken to the UARB, and we are quick to mention that to folks. And of course, they have a separate board of directors where, although a couple of councils are a member, but they have a separate board of directors. Do you actually, even though I guess, you know, we are the only shareholder of you, if you will, of this utility. It's now not a department or a division or anything of HRM. It's actually a utility and regulated as a utility. But you do have the ability to go in and audit them on our behalf of the stakeholders.
Yes, sorry, I've got something covered on my cameras and stuff there for a second, sorry. Yes, my mandate under the charter does extend itself to Halifax Water, and in fact, one of the early audits that I did during my tenure as Auditor General was an audit at Halifax Water, where we looked at how they managed sort of the drinking water supply.
Right. Yeah. No, it's always sort of, you know, and maybe I need to do a little more homework. That relationship is always sort of something that we get questions about, and perhaps I still don't understand well enough. But thank you, and certainly I'll be supporting this motion.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions? And if not, thank you very much, Phoebe, for putting the motion into the chat. The motion is that the Budget Committee include $71,100 in additional funding for costs associated with the IT audit project within the proposed 2021-22 budget for the Office of the Auditor General to the parking lot as an operating over budget option for consideration. With that, I would like to call for the question.
Question.
Councillor Outthit.
Voting yes.
Councillor Daigle-Gammon.
Voting in favor of the motion.
Councillor Hensby.
Affirmative.
Councillor Kent.
In favor?
Councillor Purdy.
In favor.
Councillor Austin.
In favor.
Councillor Mancini.
In favor of the motion.
Councillor Mason.
For the motion.
Councillor Smith.
For.
Councillor Cleary.
Yes.
Councillor Morris.
Voting in favor.
Councillor Cuddle.
In favor.
Councillor Stoddard.
Voting in favor of the motion.
Councillor Lovelace.
Yes.
Councillor Blackburn.
Voting in favor of the motion.
Councillor Russell.
In favor.
Mayor Savage.
In favor.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you very much for that, everyone. So that motion passes. We are just about finished with the agenda. At this point, we are finished with this meeting. We will be taking a break, and I can't remember how the clerk rephrased it, but we will be reconvening on Friday morning at 10 a.m. The clerk will send out new meeting invites for us to join, so I look forward to seeing you on Friday morning. I don't believe we need to adjourn because we are continuing with the same meeting.
You declare the recess, Mr. Chair.
We are recessed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.